How to stop anxiety for good. Now, one of the fears that anxiety sufferers have, if you have physical symptoms that scare you, if you get these scary intrusive thoughts, if anxiety has just debilitated your life, one of the fears is, hey, even if I can get out of this, what's stopping this from ever happening again? And because of this, you may be avoiding doing certain things. You may avoid making that commitment at work or going on a trip because what happens if this comes back? You're even concerned, can I even get out of this? Well, in this video, I'm gonna tell you what really happens. Is this something you're always gonna have to deal with forever? How do you prevent it from ever coming back in the future? So let's get it started. So before I break it down, if you like the content in this video, if it really provides value on your journey, I would definitely recommend subscribing, liking the video, turning on the bell notification. It really helps the channel out a great deal and it allows me to keep making this content for you. So that being said, when I was in the anxiety journey, it destroyed me, right? Like I had physical symptoms that kept making me go to doctors, thinking there was something wrong. I was getting these intrusive thoughts. And what happened is that my life just became smaller and smaller. I was actually in a different country when I fell into the anxiety cycle, came back home, and I was living with my parents. I went from like this carefree, pretty much free-spirited guy to a guy that couldn't even leave his house. So my standards for anxiety recovery were pretty low. I was just like, can I even get out of this? Can I at least have a normal life? Normal life meaning, could I at least work an 8 to 5? And could I actually somewhat be able to manage this to a certain degree? And so what I find is that when people are struggling with anxiety, one of the concerns they have is this something I'm gonna be able to get out of? And what happens if I ever fall back into the cycle? Like, is this always something I'm gonna have to deal with? And because of the misinformation and anxiety, it's very hard to know. And so here's what I would say. If you're really concerned about falling back into the cycle, here's my honest answer. Here's the truth. If you're actually able to overcome your anxiety, and I mean fully, I mean you're actually able to fully recover, you will never fall back into the cycle again. That's actually the truth. Now, I know that sounds a little too good to be true, but remember, as someone who's a few steps ahead of you, who's came out of this, who's helped countless people around the world, I can tell you for sure, people do not fall back in once they actually come out. But what I find is when people are on their recovery journey, what happens is that they're more concerned about falling back in before even coming out. So if you're struggling with these physical symptoms, if you're getting these intrusive thoughts, if you're getting these feelings of unreality, derealization, depersonalization, here's what I would say. Focus on getting out of this first. And what happens is that I find that when people are going through the journey, there's like different fears that come into place. So in the mentorship, when we're guiding people step by step to full recovery, one of their first fears are, am I gonna feel better at all? Am I gonna get any relief from recovery? Am I gonna get any relief from these symptoms, okay? So that's their first fear. Then what happens is that their second fear is, okay, I'm starting to feel better, but what happens if there's a glass ceiling? What happens if I can only get so much better, right? So that's the second fear. And what happens is that over time we break through that too, and they actually get really good days. Then they have amazing days. Amazing days in the sense that like, if they had been struggling with anxiety, if they looked at the days that they were gonna get in the future, they would have been like, oh my God, that's amazing. I can go back and do everything. And then they'll have a little bit of setback here and there. Then one of the last fears people have on the recovery journey, even in the mentorship is, Shaan, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? There's the fear of what happens if you fall back into the cycle. And what I always say is just focus on coming out of this. Focus on getting out of it. What will happen is that you will learn the principles of recovery. You'll understand the mechanics of anxiety. And as a consequence of that, you will never fall back into the cycle. And so if you really want to know more about this, how the recovery journey looks like, how does recovery, what do you even do for recovery? What I'll do is I'll put a link down below to a book. It's an ebook. I've written it out. It's absolutely free. It's something that would have helped me on my recovery journey. And I just wrote it because I felt like, when I was struggling, I didn't know which direction to go. And there was so much misinformation. If I could just boil it down to a few things and help you understand how recovery works, because recovery is actually quite simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And so if you can understand these principles, well, then it'll guide you on your recovery journey. So the link is down below. Check it out. It's absolutely free. Now, the last thing I'll mention is there are often times when people have fallen into the cycle before in the past and they've managed to come out of it on their own, only to maybe 6 months later, few years later, decades later, they fall back into the cycle. And so they think, oh my God, I came out of this. What happens if this happens again? Like, what happens if I can't come out of the cycle this time? Or what happens if I come out of the cycle? What happens if I fall back in? And you may have even gone through this too. And one of the things as somebody who guides people was I was actually quite surprised by how many people had fallen into the cycle before. And so here's what I would say. When people actually end up falling into the cycle and manage to come out first, here's the interesting thing. They manage to recover, but they stumble to recovery. And one of the things that they do is that they recover unconsciously. They don't know what they did to recover. And so what happens is that they don't know what they did to recover. They go back to living. And then what happens is there's a perfect storm of stressors that throws them back into the cycle. Now, what's really unique when you actually fully overcome this, when I mean true recovery, is that you come out consciously. You know exactly what you did to come out. Now, if you know exactly what to do to come out of this, tell me, would you ever fall back into the cycle? Would you make yourself fall back into the cycle? The only people that fall back into the cycle are people that don't know how recovery looks like, how anxiety works. And so what happens is they're perfect stressors and then they fall back into the cycle because they don't understand how things work. But if you're able to recover, if you're able to fully come out of this, you won't fall back in. You'll know exactly which direction to go. And even if you do have a perfect storm of stressors, it will never hinder you and make you fall back in. That's one of the reasons why when you actually overcome this, I always say you become a better person. You become a more stronger, resilient person. In fact, so many people in the mentorship, once they get out of this, they can handle stress more. They can handle more stressors. And this way they have even a fuller life than they had before they had anxiety. So I hope this really helps. I hope this gives you insight of how this recovery process works, and not to be too concerned about the fact of what happens if this happens in the future. I would say just focus on right now and getting better right now. How to make sure you don't fall back in will happen on its own, and the mentorship is one of the last things we address. And so right now I would just say focus on the steps in front of you. Don't focus on 10 steps ahead, just focus on the next step. So I hope this video helps. If you really want to know more about how the recovery journey looks like, how people's recovery journey are, I'll put a link down below to recovery stories of people that have recovered out of this. The recovery stories are, majority of them are people from the mentorship. A lot of them are actually coaches in the mentorship, but you will see that a lot of people have similar patterns in the recovery journey. And this is why I say recovery is something that's replicable, that's predictable. Once you focus on a few things, recovery is in fact inevitable. So I hope this video helps, and I'll see you in the next one.